For a long time I believed I was responsible with money. Careful, disciplined, practical. From the outside it looked like I had everything under control. But sometimes in very quiet moments, a strange thought appeared. I wondered if I was really being responsible, or if I had simply become afraid to live. For years I told myself I was doing what mature people do. I planned before I spent anything. I compared prices. I postponed things that felt unnecessary. Something could wait, I made it wait. And people respected that about me. They called it responsibility. They said I was thoughtful, that I knew how to manage my life. And I believed that too. I told myself this is what adulthood looks like. You stop being impulsive. You stop wasting money. You think about the future before the present. So I became very good at that. Very good at calculating. Very good at postponing. Very good at saying, not now. Not because I couldn't afford something, but because it felt safer not to choose it. The strange thing is, nothing about my life looked restricted from the outside. My bills were paid. My savings slowly grew. My decisions looked reasonable. There was no chaos. But somewhere inside all that discipline, something became very quiet. Not painful. Not dramatic. Just quiet. I started noticing small moments. Standing in a store and holding something in my hands, and putting it back. Opening a website to book a trip, and closing the page. Thinking about something I wanted, and immediately explaining to myself why it could wait. It always sounded reasonable. Responsible. And yet sometimes a quiet thought appeared. One I rarely said out loud. I wondered if I had become so good at controlling my life, that I had slowly stopped allowing myself to live inside it. The thing about discipline is that it doesn't feel like fear. It feels like responsibility. It appears in small decisions no one else notices. Standing in a store and looking at something you like, and quietly putting it back on the shelf. Not because you can't afford it, just because it feels unnecessary. Or opening a page to book a trip somewhere, and suddenly starting to calculate everything. The cost. The timing. Whether it's really practical. And after a few minutes, closing the page. Telling yourself it can wait. There were many moments like that in my life. Small pauses. Small withdrawals. Nothing dramatic. Just a quiet habit of stepping back from anything that felt a little uncertain. Even small pleasures started going through a kind of internal approval process. Do I really need this? Is this responsible? Is this the smartest decision? And most of the time the answer was simple. Not now. Later. Maybe someday. From the outside that kind of life looks very stable. Bills are paid. Savings grow. Nothing reckless happens. Life looks organized. But something else starts happening quietly. You begin to live inside a constant posture of restraint. Not because someone forces you to, as it becomes normal. I told myself I was protecting my future. That this is what mature women do. They think ahead. They stay careful. They avoid unnecessary risks. And for many years that explanation felt completely true. But eventually I noticed something uncomfortable. The careful version of my life was always happening in the future. And the present moment had quietly become the place where I practiced restraint. I didn't call it fear. I called it discipline. Over time discipline stopped being something I practiced. It became part of who I was. I was the reliable one. The one who didn't make careless decisions. The one who didn't waste money. The one who always thought ahead. People trusted that about me. If something needed to be handled carefully, I was the person who would do it. And I carried that identity very seriously. Being responsible felt like a quiet kind of pride. I didn't need much. I didn't make impulsive choices. I didn't create problems that could have been avoided. But something else slowly attached itself to that identity. A constant alertness about the future. I was always thinking about what might happen later, what might go wrong, what needed to be prepared for. It didn't feel exhausting. It just became a quiet background calculation that never really stopped. Planning, estimating, preventing. From the outside it looked like control. And people respected it. That's the strange part. Discipline is something the world rewards. No one questions the woman who is careful. No one worries about the woman who is always prepared. But inside that identity, something subtle was happening. The more disciplined I became, the less space there was for uncertainty. And uncertainty is where a lot of life actually happens. Not recklessness, just openness. The possibility that something might not be perfectly controlled. For a long time I believed my discipline was protecting my life. Protecting my stability. Protecting my future. And maybe in some ways it did. But one day I noticed something that was uncomfortable to admit. My discipline wasn't only protecting my life. It was protecting my fear of uncertainty. Not loudly. Not consciously. Just quietly shaping the limits of what I allowed myself to experience. And once I saw that, I couldn't completely unsee it. Nothing dramatic happened. My life didn't collapse. From the outside everything still looked stable. But a very simple realization appeared. I had spent many years protecting my sense of safety. Not my life. My safety. And those two things are not the same. Safety is about control. About making sure nothing unpredictable enters the system. About reducing risk as much as possible. And I had become very good at that. My life was organized. My decisions were careful. Nothing irresponsible was happening. But when I looked honestly, something else was true too. Nothing surprising was happening either. Very little entered my life that I hadn't already approved in advance. Everything passed through the same filter. Is this safe? Is this necessary? Is this responsible? And most of the time the answer had to be yes before I allowed it. That's when the uncomfortable realization appeared. I wasn't only protecting my life. I was protecting my fear. Quietly shaping the limits of what I allowed myself to experience. And the strange thing is, nothing was falling apart. But nothing was opening either. I don't regret being disciplined. There is something steady about knowing how to take care of your life. Paying attention to money. Thinking about the future. Avoiding decisions that create chaos. None of that is wrong. In many ways that discipline carried me through years that required stability. But what I didn't notice at first is how easily discipline can slowly become an identity. The responsible one. The careful one. The woman who always makes the reasonable choice. At some point I stopped asking a very simple question. Not, is this responsible? But something else. Is there any life in this choice? Because responsibility and life don't always move in the same direction. Responsibility reduces risk. Life sometimes enters through uncertainty. Not recklessness. Just through small openings that are not fully calculated. A dinner you didn't plan weeks ahead. A trip that doesn't make perfect financial sense. A moment where you choose something simply because it feels meaningful now. For a long time I believed discipline meant protecting my future. Maybe it did. But I also began to understand something else. If every decision is filtered only through safety, life becomes very quiet. Predictable, stable, and strangely distant. Not painful, just distant. The kind of distance where everything works, but something inside you is no longer participating fully. I didn't realize how much of my life I had spent waiting for the right moment. When things would be more stable, more certain, more justified. But the right moment kept moving further into the future. And eventually I understood something very simple. Security is important. But it cannot be the only value guiding a life. Because safety protects what already exists. Life usually begins where a little uncertainty is allowed. I was disciplined. I was careful. I was responsible. But for a long time I confused safety with living. And they are not the same thing. Sometimes the most honest realization arrives quietly. Not with regret. Just with clarity. Safety is valuable. But safety alone is not a life.
You are welcome to come back.